Hey guys, welcome back. I got a special guest here, Shane Scott. You've been on the podcast before. We have an episode out. People can go back and check that one out. But this one's going to be a little bit different because before we talked about your event, the Journey to Nobody, and it was previous to me going through the event. So I really wanted to have you back on so that we can talk more about that experience, because I'll say it was the most life-changing event I've ever been to. And it's so different than what a lot of people are thinking events they've been to. Like, you know, somebody's up on stage and they hear him speak, or even like I've been to some that are physically challenging. I've told a lot of people about. I've even said that on podcasts. I've had guests that have been part of that on my podcast. It's different than that. It's more of an experience, and it really kind of gets you out of your head into your heart. It allows you to be able to process things differently and experience reality as it really is, and not this illusion of the world that we live in, where most people just kind of live in an illusion. So we're going to dive into that with you, Shane, today, and you're the master at it. And I love even just having you on, being around you, because every time you're here, you kind of challenge me on thoughts without even knowing that you're challenging me on thoughts. It's just how you choose to live your life.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the master, but I'm certainly passionate about it.
Yeah.
Because of the impact it has on my life and other people's lives. And I kind of feel like the journey to nobody is really just that journey back to your true self, your higher self, back to reality, back to just being honest, recognizing what is and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it have such a huge impact on people's lives, because once you get that you're the source, you're the creator, and it's not necessarily all wrapped in what you do. It's your way of being. It's your energy that's creating. Which the tricky part to that is that you're creating, and your mind may not even be aware that you're creating.
Yeah.
And it may not even be through the things you're doing. So it's kind of getting us back to recognizing just how powerful we are.
Yeah.
And it's something you don't necessarily understand, but you can experience it.
No, yeah, I agree with that. But people don't know what it's like, and I want to kind of hook them in a little bit to listen to this whole episode, because guys, it is going to be so amazing if you can really lean into it. You've had a bunch of people go through your program now, and we'll say that there's been some miracles that have happened in their life after they've gone through your event. Can you share some 2-3 highlights of people that have been through it? And I know there's a ton. We've talked about a bunch. I have my own. But maybe just to highlight, to kind of hook people in, what does this do for people?
Well, I feel like what it does is, in a way, puts somebody back in the driver's seat of their life and what they're creating. And they get that a lot of their stance in life, their inner stance in life is really a defensive stance. It's, I don't want this to happen. And then what they'll do is create that. They'll create their own challenges. And it gives people the opportunity to really realize that a lot of what made up their stance in life, their walls, their fixed beliefs, their stories, were made up out of lies, essentially.
Yeah.
And humans, when they don't know something, that's a fearful state. Mystery is a fearful state. If we don't know something, there's something inside of us that feels like we need to know it. Because if we don't know it, then there's some fear attached to not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
So what humans will do is create something, create an idea, create a belief. Even if it's not true, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
As long as the ego mind has something to hold on to, something is better than nothing. And so we've created a lot of somethings, and we've created a somebody.
Yeah.
And ultimately it's just a character we're playing. And most of it's created out of fear.
Yeah.
And so the journey to nobody gives people the opportunity to get back to that space of love.
Yeah.
And to create from that space. I feel like you cannot not create. You're just creating no matter what.
Right.
So it's not really, teaching people something new. It's just pointing out that this is how life is working. And if you really want your life to work, you got to be in alignment with what does work. Because our ego mind is more interested in being right than getting what you want.
The result. Yeah.
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 And it's insane, essentially.
Yeah. So it's funny because the results, I kind of asked the question, like, what are the results that some people have seen? And it's a hard question to answer, because one of the things is like, well, you told us what it is, just barely, but it's hard because a lot of people are thinking, oh, what are the results of this training, or the blueprint that he's going to give me, or like your whole thing is there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
You're already whole and complete as you are. Let me just take away almost the things that are holding back, or just tweaking something. Not even tweaking. How would you describe it?
Well, yeah, it's basically getting rid of what isn't true and what isn't serving you. It is challenging your belief systems. You will experience cognitive dissonance, and you can even tell people beforehand that's what you're going to experience, and they still seem shocked when it happens.
How would you define cognitive dissonance to the listener so they understand?
Well, cognitive dissonance occurs when we take on new information that doesn't necessarily match the information that we have, and it creates a state of confusion.
Yeah.
Because typically how we learn is we take in new information, we try to relate it to something that we already know.
Yeah.
And so it's through association that we learn. So the cognitive dissonance space is when we can't figure out how this new information relates with what we think is the absolute truth.
Yeah.
And so what people will tend to do is dismiss it.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about results, though, I mean, I can think of so many examples, but one example is just watching people's business thrive. And they didn't necessarily do anything different. They just freed up the space to allow more abundance to come in.
Yeah.
Relationships. I've seen it save marriages. Just going through this transformational process. I've had people share that they were at a point in life where they didn't want to live anymore. And having gone through that experience, it awoken up inside of them that desire to want to live.
Yeah.
I've watched people go through that have struggled with addictions. And typically, addictions can plague people their whole life. And there's even, residential programs and outpatient programs and all sorts of meetings that people can attend to support people through their addictions. And I've seen people go through this 3-day experience and walk out letting go of their addictions, realizing that the addiction was just a way in which they were avoiding, dealing with reality, because reality felt really painful.
Right.
But once you step into it and you're willing to actually experience it, it's not as painful as you think it is.
Yeah. But you're avoiding that pain.
Yeah. And when you're avoiding it, you're just kicking the can down the road.
Right.
Because one of the principles is the only way out is through.
Yeah.
So you got to deal with what is. You got to deal with reality.
I think one of the things that you said in the training that stuck out to me was a lot of that stress and anxiety that people feel, or that leads them to addiction or keeps them in there because they're trying to hide from that stress and pain or whatever is coming up inside of them. Is a lot of that is just unexperienced experiences.
Correct.
They're not willing to experience that experience, and so they kick the can.
Right.
Whereas if they would just experience it, quit calling it bad is how I try to look at it.
Yeah.
There's this idea of good and bad that you taught me in that training of, once we call it bad, this feeling is bad, then we naturally want to suppress it.
Yeah.
Push it down.
Right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And those are very, emotionally charged words, to the point that we will do something that we feel is right, even though it doesn't get us what we want.
Right.
And we'll do it over and over and over again, because we'd rather be right than get what we want.
Can we go there for a second?
Sure.
Common one that you see people go through. What's something common where they think it's right, they know it's right in their mind, they won't let go, and it's keeping them stuck? What's a good example of that?
A simple one is if you serve other people, that's where you get love and acceptance. And so someone who believes that will always look for people to serve, and they'll create people in their life that need them so they can serve, because they're using that as a way to get value.
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't have it, then their value goes with it. Really, what we're talking about is anything that we attach some condition to. And we do that by believing in it, making things mean something, versus just allowing it to be what it is. And instead of judging it, experience it.
Yeah. Quit calling it good and bad, right and wrong.
Yeah. I mean, certain things feel the way they feel, but it's avoiding the ways that we don't want to feel is just going to keep us stuck.
Yeah.
Because part of being human is being willing to experience all the emotions.
Yeah. But people resist that thought, I've noticed too, right? Don't you feel the same way? Like when you suggest to somebody the possibility of not looking at things as right and wrong, good and bad, they resist that thought just to even start thinking that way.
That starts to create some cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because what they think I'm saying is that there's no such thing as right and wrong. Well, I look at it like there's what works versus what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because I'm more interested in my life working than being right, which means I got to be open to the possibility that I'm wrong.
Right.
And that's a difficult stance for people to take.
Yeah.
Because when you're wrong, we typically associate that with feelings of, there's a whole bunch of different emotions attached to that feeling of being wrong. And we'd rather be right, because when we're right, we feel good, we're validated.
Yeah.
You know? And so if people realize that that's just an egoic stance, the ego wants to be right. It needs to be right. Its whole survival is based upon, being right.
Being right and knowing the answer.
Knowing the answer.
Yeah. The name Journey to Nobody. Like, it hits me harder now, having gone through your training, becoming a nobody.
Yeah.
First raw thought when I heard that from you, of being a nobody, I was like, ooh, I don't like the sound of that.
Yeah.
A nobody doesn't seem like anything I've ever dreamt about becoming.
Yeah.
You think more as a kid, I thought I want to become a baseball player, and I want to be
somebody
rich, or I want to be popular, or I want to be, and then as vague or specific, there's just things that you dream of and imagine that you're going to attach your identity to. And becoming a nobody was never on my list.
Yeah.
And I would argue that it's probably not very common there's always a possibility of somebody thinking that, but just naturally, it doesn't usually come.
Typically. And even at the beginning of the training, I ask people how many of you are interested in becoming a nobody. I don't get a lot of people that get too enthusiastic about that.
Yeah.
But I feel like once it sets in and people get what I'm saying through experience, they realize that is their true self. Their true self is limitless.
Yeah.
It's not a somebody. It's really indescribable.
Yeah.
But
try to describe it, Shane.
Yeah.
What is a nobody?
Well, nobody is you without the need to be somebody. It's you without the need for this identity where you get your value from your identity.
Yeah.
And I also realize, of course, that we're not going to stop being a somebody. We're just creating the awareness around what that is. That way we don't get stuck in those weeds, and we can adjust with life as it happens. And we don't have to live in the world where we're constantly in this defensive stance, making sure that our lives don't get disrupted by, the things that we're afraid of.
Yeah.
And we can be free. It's really the key to freedom.
Yeah. Since the event, I've kind of likened it to like Horcruxes in Harry Potter.
I haven't seen that.
Okay. This idea in Harry Potter that Voldemort is the bad guy. And I have not read the book, Shane. I've only watched the movie, so I'm not a like crazy nerd Harry Potter but this is going to sound nerdy.
Okay.
Okay. So in Harry Potter, you got Voldemort, who is now, I don't remember how many, and somebody's going to correct me on this, but he has what's called Horcruxes that he attaches himself to. They're outside of him. Okay. There's objects. One actually is a snake, because he speaks parcel tongue, which is like a snake language. So that, and then there's a sword, and then there's like a goblet, and there's like 6, 7, 8 of these things. The only way to kill Voldemort is to be able to kill all these different Horcruxes. And it just has hit me since the event. We all do that.
Mm-hmm.
We all connect ourselves to these Horcruxes. But here's the thing. In the movie, when Harry Potter is like destroying these different Horcruxes, Voldemort feels it. He feels the pain of each one. He's not there, but he just like, he like struggles to breathe for a little while.
Yeah.
Well, it's so similar to what we're talking about. We've attached ourselves to probably thousands
Mm-hmm.
of these Horcruxes in our life. And what happens though when one gets destroyed? We feel less or worth less. And we feel like a part of us has died, but nothing has happened to us.
Right.
And that's the difference, I think. Something's happening to Voldemort, but we're doing it, but we're just creating the feeling because it isn't us. It's outside of us.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Well, maybe she should.
Yeah,
She should be J.K. Rowling should be on my podcast next. We'll all sit down and have a conversation with that billionaire.
Yeah, there's so many different analogies that can apply, and there's a lot of different movies and things that kind of depict all this stuff. A lot of it is, based in more Eastern philosophy, more of wholeness and oneness, versus Western philosophy is based more in separateness. And we're more interested in our separateness than we are in our wholeness. And in the training, we practice wholeness by stating that everybody goes or nobody goes, that we operate as a unit. And we're here to take responsibility for not only yourself, but for your group.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a different way that we typically live in the world. We live in the world as, what's best for me.
Yeah.
And in order for me to win, someone else has to lose.
Yeah.
Western philosophy has given us a lot of things, technology, all sorts of different things that we get from Western ways of thinking. But when it comes down to, who you are and what your value is, if you don't see it in the whole, you're gonna miss it, because healing really just means wholeness.
Mm.
And transformation's not about necessarily becoming whole. It's about realizing you're already whole.
Yeah.
And so
that was a weird concept for me too, Shane. If
Yeah.
I can kind of highlight that for a second, because I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah.
That I've seen in my sphere. They still don't get it. They'll have this belief that shuts them from fully accepting that, well, yeah, but I make mistakes and I sin and I this and that. And so, yeah, I believe that I am created perfect, but I'm not whole. I need these things that are outside of me to heal me.
Yeah.
And they can't wrap their mind around it. It was hard for me to wrap my mind around it, and hopefully I can continue to try to wrap my head around it more, because I always want to revert back to what's comfortable.
Yeah. Lots of years of programming, and you find it everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it is going to create cognitive dissonance. It is going to cause you to, to maybe be uncomfortable a little bit. But once you experience it and you get what wholeness is, then, obviously you don't need to understand it. It becomes a reality that's rooted in your experience. So when I think of like, I'm trying to think, I have a moment here. I have to edit this part.
Okay, here we go.
I'll edit that part. But I was going to make a comment about that being a difficult thing for people. So the separateness.
Yeah.
So here we go again.
Yep.
So in that separateness, it really does come down to you as an individual, and it comes down to the survival of that individual. It comes down to, it's really just all about identity is who am I? Am I the person that you mentioned sinning? Am I this person?
Yeah.
Am I, life does have consequences. That's just a reality. But you're not life. You're not life. You're the one that's experiencing life. So no matter what happens to you in life, it will never change who you are. And that becomes really profound when you're dealing with people who have struggled with abuse. Because people tend to believe that if I've been abused, that must mean that I'm worthless.
Yeah.
And if we all sat around and had that conversation, I don't know that anybody would think that was an intelligent thought. Most people would say, no, of course that doesn't define you. But look at all the ways that we've associated our self and our worth to things that have happened in life.
Right.
It could be striking out in baseball. It could be getting cut from the baseball team. It could be a whole bunch of different things. And we associate our value and worth to things that are like outside of us.
Right.
They're not us.
Yeah.
So the journey to nobody is all about finding that true self that can never be tainted, can never be harmed.
Yeah.
It's perfect. It's always been perfect. So it's not about making anybody better. It's about stepping out of the illusion that one day you're going to become better.
Yeah.
Now, I know better is a concept, and it's something that we experience. It's the way that we describe the world, but it doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
It only exists because we found a way to talk about it. We found a way to judge it. Life. We found a way to say this is this and that's that. And this one's better than this one. Well, you might prefer one or the other, but both of them coexist.
Yeah.
And by trying to run from one and try to get the other, you're only going to just get the one you're running from.
So here's a question I think a lot of people have, though, is then there's the other side of the spectrum that's leaning all the way over, in my opinion, of, well, then are you saying, Shane, that I don't have to go and read books about XYZ? I don't have to work at becoming a better baseball player because I already am better. I don't need to work on this, that, the other. You're obviously not saying that, but how do you explain that to people that because if you're already whole and complete as you are, we all can see that if you put in the work in something, you grow.
Absolutely.
So how are they different?
We're talking about value.
Okay.
If you become a really good baseball player, it doesn't make you a better person. It just makes you a good baseball player.
Yeah.
And if you want to be a good baseball player, it requires working at it. But we're talking about ultimately, who are you? So if you work really hard to make the baseball team and you don't make it, does that make you less of a person?
Right. It's the Horcrux.
We tend to believe it does. And so,
this whole illusion of this world is supported by that, right? We give value to people and money to people that do that, and they think if they don't perform in that tournament, see all these professional athletes, I feel so bad for them. I see people will slam them all the time. They shouldn't have hit that racket. So, like tennis players, they shouldn't have smashed their racket on. That's so unprofessional. Oh my gosh, like get them out of there. Can't believe it. Like the pressure that they feel because they've attached their identity to tennis so much, and they're playing terrible in the championship match, and it's embarrassing in front of millions of people. I feel bad for them. And then somehow they're not supposed to show any emotion. And they can't throw their racket, smash their racket, and experience their emotion, I think is absolutely insane that we require people to do that. But it's like we all do that. That's just an extreme example. We all do that. We all feel worthless when the time has come and we're not performing like we think we should. We think we're not good enough.
Yeah.
But it's just feedback, is what you would say.
Yeah.
Probably.
I mean, it's part of just having the human experience is, things happen when they happen. They don't when they don't. And in either case, it doesn't change who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, finding your sense of self and value in anything outside of yourself or outside of the idea that you're perfect is only going to lead to just unnecessary suffering, unnecessary stress, unnecessary anxiety. And a lot of us live with that because we're so busy being somebody and keeping up our pretenses that this is who I am. And, it is part of the character that we play, and we get to, in a lot of ways, invent our character. But when we create our character out of fear, then it's a character that's going to experience a lot of unnecessary suffering.
Yeah.
And you're putting a lot of energy into keeping up the pretenses. It's a lot of energy to keep your story alive and real.
Yeah. Yep. We say stuck in this hamster wheel just over and over. Some of the highlights, if we can talk about some of these things that I learned going through it, is you already touched on, well, a couple of these, but one that we haven't really touched on, I guess, is that I learned that I should get better at loving myself. And this is playing off of what we just talked about, that I'm whole and complete as I am. But I realized when I was a child how much I cared about other people's, especially family members and parents, thinking that I was enough, or they were proud of me, or they loved me. And I created all of that.
That's your somebody training.
Yeah.
It starts when you're young.
Yeah.
Your parents want to make you somebody.
Yep.
It's important to be somebody because ultimately, that determines, that's the way we've defined it, is that determines your value.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, going out and accomplishing amazing things feels amazing. And I'm not saying don't do that.
No.
What I'm saying is that if you go out to accomplish it and it doesn't happen, it's not, it doesn't ultimately change who you are. Whenever we attach our identity to something, like if your identity is attached to being a baseball player, then what happens when you don't play baseball anymore?
Yeah, you retire.
Who are you now?
Who are you?
So every identity you create will always end in a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to have an identity crisis.
But then if you can be aware, and this is the part that I love for me, and you can correct me on any of this because I'm still learning, is you're still going to do it. Because you're not even saying that, I think we've had conversations about this where you can't stop it. Your ego's just going to you can't get rid of your ego entirely. It's just that how did you phrase it? You becoming aware that you're doing it. Because if you can be aware of what, you can laugh at it.
Yeah, it really just comes down to consciousness awareness.
Yeah.
We're not trying to change it. We're not trying to fix it.
Not going to call it bad or good.
Yeah.
Right or wrong.
We're not going to try to love ourselves. We're not going to do any of that stuff. I mean, you can, but ultimately anything you try to change or fix, you just end up reinforcing the thing you're trying to change or fix.
Yeah.
Because you're operating under the premise that there must be something wrong.
Right.
I mean, how do
Most
you
people
love
do.
yourself?
Massages.
Okay.
Going golfing.
Right.
Hanging out with the boys.
But anything we attach to it means that now we've just taken something and attached something to it, which means you can only love yourself if you're doing those things.
Yeah.
So
no, I've discovered that it's less that, and self-love is more learning now. I'm actually realizing that it's both of these, but loving the things that I have that I used to call that's a bad side of me, or that's wrong, or that's a defect, or whatever terminology anybody wants to use and how they call it to themselves, but something that they're not proud of.
Yeah.
Loving that side of you.
It's the only way to be free.
Yeah. But we're so bent on
fixing
changing
yourself, changing yourself. There's always something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There's always something wrong. And once you overcome one thing, you'll find something else.
Yeah.
There's no end to it.
I have to bring this up. I guess I think that this is a great time. You touched on it, but most people focus on what they don't want, and then that's what they get. And you're the one who told me at your house, energy doesn't speak English. It just brings closer to you what you think about most. And I've realized that. I had just on a walk the other day with Corinne. I told you about this, that just hit me so strong that 90% of the time, and that's just a fake number, 90%, you know,
Sure.
most of the time it seems like, if I review, that I do kind of I talk in ways that it's like, you know, I don't want to become like this. I don't want to become like that guy, or I don't want this, because that's familiar. I see what I don't want, but it's so much harder to see what you do want or create what you do want, because you have to think about it and you have to create the thing that you actually want. But we don't talk that way most of the time. And I would challenge, hey, most of the people that are listening to this, you don't do it either. And you better start to recognize that what you don't want when you're talking, you say, man, I don't want to live in this house my whole life. I don't want to be in this job forever. I don't want my bank account to look like this. I don't want to drive this car forever. Guess what you're bringing closer to you? Those things.
Yeah. Because you're seeing that they're a problem and you're in a state of resistance to it. And whatever you resist persists. Whatever you fight, you make stronger. So ultimately, you get to be right, but not necessarily in the way that you want to be.
Yeah.
And I'll just put it this way. Let's get rid of right and wrong and just say it doesn't work if you focus on what you don't want.
Yeah.
It doesn't work in the way that you'll get what you want. But again, a play on words, because all of this is a paradox at some level. It actually works perfectly.
Yeah.
Everything works perfectly. Whatever you energetically connect to is what you'll attract.
Yeah.
And if you want to know what you're energetically connected to, look at the results you're producing in life. Now, that's something you can experience and you don't necessarily understand.
Yeah.
One of the, and I won't call it a frustration, but in my experience of speaking to people, and you can read all this stuff in books, you can say these things over and over again, and we think we get them up here, but not until we actually get how powerful we are here and how we create from here. And that's something I don't know how to put into words.
Yeah.
But once you get that, then all of a sudden, you now start to create from a different space, but you're also realizing that all your reasons, your excuses, your circumstances really don't have any power. Yeah. Only that we give those things power. Yeah. And I think a good example I'd love to bring up, if you're open to it, is just what's happened in your business in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You went through a training.
3 weeks?
3 weeks, yeah. So what happened?
Immediately after.
But what happened? So if I'm interested in learning from you and I came to you and said, you know, how did you double or triple your business? And
by doing nothing different.
I know, but I'm looking for steps, right?
Yeah.
Give me the steps.
The
I want to do that. So we're talking about something that you can't talk about. But something shifted inside of you and your outside world shifted itself.
I saw it happen too in a lot of my friends' lives that went through your training. I didn't have the expectation at all in my mind that it was going to happen to me. I didn't even think about it before. It just happened.
Yeah.
And then I was like, then I remembered, oh yeah, it happened for them. Maybe that's why. And then I tried to make meaning of it. Well, how did I do that? How is it happening? How do I keep it going? Well, now I'm just mind effing myself at that point.
That's right.
Mentally masturbating over it.
You're trying to make it mean something.
I'm trying to make it mean something, and then I catch myself and I go, it doesn't have to. But that's what you're training. That is the answer, I guess, if I was to give one, is that it doesn't have to make sense. Yeah. It's an experience. It's not good or bad. It's what I want, and I'm creating it. And I know, and I'm aware that I'm creating it.
Yeah.
From a space that's somewhere in the general vicinity of here is what it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all I can really say about it.
And I don't know how much people actually remember what I say in the training, and they don't have to. It's the experience I want them to get. But one thing I do say in the beginning is, you know, if what you want come Saturday night is joy or love or peace, that you may walk out of here with that and not understand how you got it.
Yeah.
And it may not make any sense to you at all. But again, that's the point.
Yeah.
learning to trust the process of life. You don't have to know.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily have to know. And that was a big shift for me in my life because I was an answer man. It was really, really important for me to know the answers, whether it was about, anything I'd say related to truth. But, typically our ethics, our morals, our values, our religion, our political stances, all those different things, they're typically rooted in something that we consider to be the truth. And so for me, I felt like the truth was what was going to give me power.
Yeah.
Having the answer, well, that's a powerful identity to have. I want to be that answer guy. It feels good when I can give people answers. And so I went to school to study all this stuff. I had a goal by the age of 30. I was just going to know everything. And I took one philosophy class, and it just changed my life because I thought, well, philosophy is a study of everything. Before there was math, before there was science, before there was anything, it was just philosophy. And so I got to really, dive deep into the origins of knowledge, causation, and, getting into religion, like where did God come from? Like all of it. And I got to a point where I realized that I was never going to be able to understand it all, and that it didn't really matter the information that I had up here. It wasn't necessarily about the information. It was about the experience.
Yeah.
And when we talk about business, because that's one question you've brought up, how does this apply to business in some of our conversations? And I use that example of Forrest Gump.
Mm-hmm.
Living Life Like Forrest Gump is a book I'm writing for entrepreneurs, because Forrest Gump, one way to say it is that he had a lower IQ, but he was too stupid to ever consider the possibility of failure. And everything to Forrest Gump was just so simple. And, everything that happened in his life, especially in his early life, would have traumatized most humans. But it didn't to him. He had braces on his legs. He taught Elvis how to dance. He got bullied by kids because he looked different and talked different. And one day, Jenny told him to take off running. He took off running. Well, that got him a full ride scholarship to the University of Alabama as a football player. And he went to Vietnam, got shot in the butt, and comes out and becomes one of the best ping pong players and wins a bunch of money, and uses that money to keep a commitment he made to his friend Bubba and started a shrimp boat company. And he didn't know anything about shrimping. A lot of people wouldn't have done that because they think they have to have knowledge, a lot of knowledge, before they act. Well, Forrest Gump didn't think that. He just said, this is what I'm going to do, and found a way to make it happen. And people would say to him, what are you, stupid? And his comment was, well, stupid as the stupid does. It was just very simple. And he goes out and pulls in garbage. Then Lieutenant Dan shows up, and there's a big storm. He describes it as just Lieutenant Dan making peace with God. The next thing you know, all the shrimp start coming in. To him, it wasn't a story about the storm. It wasn't a story about how the storm destroyed all the other boats, and he's the last boat left, which is why, they had access to all this shrimp. They had no competition. To him, it was just a simple story of just staying focused on what you want, trusting the process. And later on in life, he just went running for no reason at all. We all think we have to have reasons for why we do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he just felt like running. And then one day, he decided he'd go home. And he inspired lots of people as a result of that. So if we were just to practice that in life, and I were to really sit down and interview you and say, Eric, how did you become successful? Well, you'd probably tell me a story. And if I wanted to dig deeper into that, I'd say, well, how did you do that? How did you start first selling homes? How did you get to a point to where, you're kind of one of the leaders in the industry? It's a tough industry, especially in St. George. There's a lot of real estate agents. The ones that succeed are the ones that really, put in the work. How did you do it? And you can give me a whole list of things, but that does not guarantee that I'm going to get it. Really, you don't know how you did it. You can tell a story about it, but you were committed to it. How do I know that? Because of the result.
Right.
That's how I know.
One of the things that you said in the training too that I don't think we've said yet is your inside world. What's going on inside is a reflection of your outside world. And your outside world,
Or the other way around,
is a reflection of your inside world.
Yeah. The outside world always mirrors your inside world 100% of the time.
Only 100% of the time.
Yeah. Only 100% of the time. And, typically when life isn't going the way we want it to, we blame it on the outside world. And then we think the outside world is what's causing our upset inside of our inside world. That happens really clearly in relationships. Someone that you care about may say something to you, you're upset. Well, who do you blame it on? You blame it on the person who said it.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, you're responsible for how you respond in life.
Yeah.
And what you respond to. And they don't really have the power to climb inside of you and make you feel anything.
Yeah.
They say what they say, you feel what you feel. They're two separate things. They're not the same thing. But in language, we take two things that are not related and we collapse them on each other.
And somehow they make sense. Yeah.
Well, we think
try
it does.
to have them make sense.
And it makes us a victim.
Yeah.
We're
Well,
powerless.
that's the other part that I wanted to highlight. Because like me, I've heard this stuff.
Yeah.
Throughout my life, I've heard this stuff that, you get to choose whether you get offended or not. And you're an agent, you're not to be acted upon, and you get to choose and there's a choice in everything. You're creator and all this, and you're not a victim. I didn't understand it ever. I've never understood it in my whole life more than when I went through your training. Because when you go through your training, you experience what it's like to experience being a creator.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot in your training ever, if you're listening, paying attention, going through the experience, leaning in, trusting the process, and just letting go, you realize you are a creator and there's 0%, like there's no way that you can look at life as a victim anymore. And that was one of the most powerful things. There's a lot. But it is one of the most powerful things that I got out of the training was it is impossible now for me to look at life where I could ever be a victim. And sometimes it hurts if my ego is more profound or pronounced in my day or whatever. And then I have to realize, oh, well, that's just my nerd that's coming out, my ego. But then I just go back to, but I'm creating it somewhere. My inside world is creating it on my outside world somehow. And then it's just being honest with yourself. Well, how's that happening?
Yeah. And you got to be open to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because somewhere you took a stance on something. Somewhere you attached to a belief or to a story that you don't want to let go of. Because who are you without that story?
Yeah. A nobody.
Yeah, and that's what people are afraid of.
Yeah.
People are afraid of being a nobody. And it's a tricky thing because once you feel like you've arrived at being a nobody, that just becomes a new somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, you're always creating an identity. Go ahead.
Oh, it's just the awareness is what we're talking about.
Yeah. Let's see if this can hit home for people because I think there are people that know I talk about this openly because I feel like a lot of people need it. So I noticed that I did this without going through your training, and now it makes more sense. But this, I think, hopefully can relate up here for people. A lot growing up, pornography was wrong, was bad, resist it, right? It's, you feel a certain way, but that's bad that you feel that way. You may like what you see, but that's bad that you like that. That's not you. That's the devil, or that's the bad side of you or something. There's all these stories that we're trying to, and it's so confusing for a lot of men. And then what happens is then they attach their identity to things in some ways, or they feel a lot of guilt and shame because they've attached themselves to a story that if they watch porn or look at porn, then they're bad. Or it has control over them because it's so addicting and more addicting than heroin that how could they stop, and all these crazy belief systems that make them a victim to the thing. Well, it's interesting because that was one that for years I resisted before even going through your training. I just was like, I got to resist because that's what I'm taught. That's the only way this is going to work. Yeah, I don't want this in my life, and if I can just resist it, eventually I'll come out on top. Well, I realized it didn't work, but the last thing that I wanted to do was accept it.
Yeah.
Because I was taught if I accepted it, then I would go all in. And what did that look like? That wasn't good. That was Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
But the second, Shane, that I was just like, if it happens, it happens. So what? That was the day where things got better. And that was the day that I started to separate myself from it, and to where the pull wasn't there. Because if it happened, it happened. It was an experience. Now, I know that there's people that are so emotionally charged with that story. There's people that do not want to accept what I just said. And maybe it doesn't work for them. I'm open to that possibility. All I'm saying is my experience was that I felt a huge resistance to an emotionally charged situation. Didn't want to change my perspective on it, but yet it wasn't getting me the result that I wanted. And then by letting go, instead of forcing it, it actually made things better.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's always going to be consequences, the choices we make. And the pornography one, or sex addiction for a lot of people, pornography is just part of it. I work with people who struggle with sex addiction, pornography addiction, and if their biggest concern when they get out of residential treatment is, am I going to go back? Right? And they're already in resistance to it. Right. They're already fighting it. And if we're going to say that energy doesn't speak English,
then it goes back to what they don't want, but that's what they're focused on.
They're already in their body feeling the anxiety, even though it's not happening. Yeah. It's now just become this anxiety that it might happen. But if they realize that that's a possibility, and ultimately it's just a choice, and it's not actually happening in this moment, which means I don't have to live with that anxiety in this moment. And that's one of the most fascinating things, I think, about human beings, is we can literally create something that isn't real and live as if it is real. Animals can't do that. So people are so concerned they're going to relapse that inside of their body's responding as if they've already relapsed.
Right.
And they're more likely going to relapse. So there seems to be some power in taking responsibility and also accepting the reality that it is a possibility.
Right.
And because it is a possibility, now it becomes a choice. Yeah. It's not something I have to run from, something I have to fight, something I have to resist. It's just now a choice. And you can get that, okay, well, that choice creates this result. It doesn't make me better or worse. I'm just not interested in this result.
Right.
I'm not interested in this pattern. It's not in alignment with what I want, ultimately. So, for example, just using that, sex addiction and pornography, one of the consequences of that is you lose your sense of what's real inside of intimacy, because it's not real intimacy when it becomes unhealthy. But you're seeking intimacy, but it's never going to fulfill you.
Mm-hmm.
And what it can do is rob people of real intimacy. Now, that's a result that you can face in life. But people take it a step further. The step further is that it's going to destroy me. And maybe in some ways you could view it that way in terms of consequences, but it can't destroy who you really are. Because you're starting with a premise that you must be broken. There must be something wrong. And that premise alone, if you believe that there's something wrong, and ultimately something wrong with you, you're going to create a world in which that's true.
Right.
And then you're going to use sex addiction, and you're going to use pornography to just be right about your belief, to create evidence that there's something wrong with you. So somewhere you say to yourself, I knew it. And it's interesting how, as humans, the amount of grace that we can offer to other humans that we don't offer to ourselves.
Yeah, that's so true.
A lot of Christians talk about the atonement and how amazing and wonderful it is, and yet it applies to everyone but them.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling that way at a point in my life, that I loved to talk about this, and I wanted everyone to know that they were loved, and that all these things that would basically anchor them in happiness and joy and all these different things, and it applied to everyone except for me. Somewhere I still was never going to be enough.
Yeah.
And I think, again, if we just took that one concept, that you are whole and complete, and you really started to apply that in your life, you would start to experience the world differently.
Yeah.
And it's not arrogance. It's not, has nothing to do with better. You just realize that life is not a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be experienced. And you start to actually experience life, because most people are not experiencing life. They're living in the story of life.
Yeah.
And they're not actually even present where they're at. And instead of even having a conversation with someone, they're, somewhere else making meaning out of everything.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, it's such a unlearning. It's stripping things down. It's getting rid of the stories. And it is, with what you're saying too, and we can kind of end on some of these notes, because I think this has been so good. And at least for me, I feel like I'm just taking it in, and hopefully there's other people the people that are listening to this can pick out some of these nuggets. But everybody is just a reflection of me. Everybody else is just another version of me. That we all go or nobody goes. That whole philosophy that it allows me to be my best self, because I want them to also, because they're just another version of me, and we all go or nobody goes. And I don't want to, now it makes it to where I don't have this belief system where, well, if I shine my light too bright, then it's going to make everybody else look more dim. It's like, no, I should shine my light as bright as I can, because that's the experience that I want. And you know what? If somebody else wants to have that experience, they can too. Anybody can create whatever they want. And if they decide that, well, I'm going to feel frustrated or jealous or envious of that, well, then that's their inside world. Mm-hmm. But then they're just another version of me. And I look at that and I go, well, that's a reflection of their life. How do I do that? And I can learn from that.
I think that last part, what you just said, is so powerful when you look at other people and realize that whatever they're experiencing or however they judge, that you are also capable of doing that. And you do it. You just do it in different ways. Yep.
It also makes it easier to judge people when you see that truly through that frame, because now I'm saying what it is, but I'm not looking at it as you're bad. I'm looking at it as, how do I do that too? Yeah. And blunt is a better word, because I just look at it as feedback for that person. I'm not as scared to give them feedback. Now they can choose to do with that feedback however they want to. But also when I receive feedback, it makes, by living my life that way, it's easier for me to receive feedback as feedback. It's not good or bad, or I'm not whole or complete as I am. There's something wrong with me. Yeah. It's just, let me pick it up. Let me look at it. Let me turn it around.
Yeah, if you think in terms of relationships, I love the work of Byron Katie.
Yeah.
Where
loving what is.
And but this concept of, if someone gives me feedback, instead of being defensive, just look and say, in what way could that possibly be true? Mm-hmm. I may not be intending to do that, but I'm open to the possibility that I might be showing up that way. Yeah.
It also doesn't mean that you have to accept it, because that would be insanity too. That everything everybody says is true. That would be chaos. But where you could just look at it. Be open. What do you say? Open to the possibility.
Yeah. Be the observer. Be willing to just actually be in the experience of it. And notice your mind's going to do what it does. It thinks what it thinks. But when you start to notice your mind, you're not your mind anymore.
Yeah.
You don't identify with your mind. And you can start to realize that your mind's running a script. It's running a story. It's needing to be right. It's comparing itself to someone else. It's doing all these different things so it can survive in its own illusion.
Yeah.
And you're going to watch that happen. And then as you pass judgments on other people, you can also look at it and say, those are really just reflections of me.
Yeah.
You know, we say a lot of things like people shouldn't do things, or they shouldn't have done this, or they should have done this, or, you know, my son shouldn't lie to me. But when I think the thought, my son shouldn't lie to me, but he does lie to me, then what I do is I make my son wrong and I distance myself from him. But when I realize my son should lie to me because he's lying to me, then I get to a place where it's like, okay, well, he is where he's at. And, you know, he lies when he lies, and I'm not going to distance myself from him. Instead, I'm just going to check his stories. You know, I might put a GPS thing on his car to see if he's actually going where he says he's going to go. But that's okay. I don't have to withdraw love from him because he's making that choice. And I think a lot of our culture, a lot of Western philosophy is raised in this. We were raised with these ideas that in the right and wrong world that, you know, people are wrong when they don't do what we agree with, and they're right when they do with what we do agree with. And so, and that's a it's a long, difficult road to go down because you know it just separates you from the energy of love. Yeah. And you know, one thing to point out, I can hear your kids in the background, that they're more connected with reality than most adults are. They're not really even living in time. Yeah. They only just live in the moment. Yeah. They really don't have even a concept of time. No. And they're a bunch of nobodies. Little by little, that's shifting, and you're going to watch it shift. I watched my kids play sports and do other things in life, and I watch when, you know, they can start comparing themselves to other people, and when they start to feel the pain that I can't do it the way other people do it, and that means something. It's one of those things we talked about earlier. You can't stop it. I can do whatever I can to try to, you know, mitigate it or teach them that they're always whole and complete no matter what. But I feel like part of life, the experience of life, is to forget yourself in order to remember. Mm-hmm. And that's having that contrast it can be powerful. That life is made up of us learning what isn't true in order to establish what is true. And ultimately, we are the truth. We are love. Yeah. We're everything. We're just pretending we're not. Right.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, so good.
Well, that's the journey to nobody.
That's it right there. Place. I mean, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing this with people. I know that it's something you're passionate about, and it's infected me too, because I've seen how it relieves a lot of stress and anxiety in my own life, and I want other people to be able to feel and experience that. Yeah. So, going to end it this way. I meant what I said at the beginning. The journey to nobody is the most powerful event that I've been through at this point in my life. It's not an event like you're used to. It's an experience. It's the best way to be able to find the journey to nobody is not to look Shane up on Instagram yet, although he's changing that. He's going to get better. No, I'm just joking. The best way is to just go to journeytonobody.com and be able to go. The next one, I believe, is in October 14th, 15th, 16th, something like that.
Yeah. I can't remember the dates.
It's right in there.
It should be on the website.
Go to the website. Guys, if you felt that you wanted to experience through this podcast, as we're talking, you want to experience something like this, experience all of life, quit living in illusion, and to be able to just free yourself of all the stories that you've told yourself. This is the best event I've ever seen. And I think that a lot of people that go on stage that teach and claim to be these gurus on things, they're living in the same matrix of being in their head and all that. Like they're just giving you more effed up feedback, some of them. So this is different. And if you want to experience what that feels like, go to that website, reach out to me. I'll direct you to. We'll get you in contact with Shane. They have calls, the Journey to Nobody group, where you can learn a little bit more. And I appreciate you guys listening this far. I want to be able to, at the end too, we have a couple of sponsors that have recently sponsored the podcast, and I'm excited for that. Allows us to be able to give more of this content to you guys. One is Holbrook Pickleball. They actually, in my opinion, have some of the best pickleball paddles on the market. I used to be I'll say pro pickleball player back when the PPA was just starting out, and their pickleball paddles to me are some of the best paddles on the market. And I appreciate them and being able to sponsor the Eric Gubler Podcast, be able to bring you more of this content. Also, Drew Bohorovich, he does mortgages. Everybody knows, or should know, that I do real estate for a living. And Drew has been incredible with my clients and taking care of them, giving them the best deals, and interest rates being so crazy right now, to be able to help them get the best deal, but also be able to understand that world. So if you're looking for somebody to be able to help you get into a home through the mortgage side, I highly recommend Drew Bohorovich to be able to help you get there. Guys, thanks so much for listening this far. Shane, thanks again for
thank you
coming, and we'll see you guys in the next one.